And over time, we become too dependent on the United States as our biggest customer, with more than 90% of our steel exports going south of the border. So moving forward, we must diversify our trade relationships. And above all, we must rely more on Canadian.
Have you ever seen an industrial heartland collapse in a single week? Detroit just did, and it started with a steel tariff. Imagine watching a metropolis built on motors and machines fall into sudden silence, the rumble of factory floors gone quiet, entire neighborhoods waiting on supply trucks that never arrive. And it all began not with bombs or blackouts, but with a pen stroke and a tariff. On July 31st, 2025, in the final hours of a quiet Friday evening, President Donald Trump addressed the nation from the White House lawn. With resolute tone, he signed an executive order raising tariffs on key Canadian imports. Among the most critical were lumber, aluminum, automobiles, and steel, an increase from 25% to a staggering 35%. The new rules would take effect at midnight, giving businesses less than 24 hours to adjust.
NATO, and I was in the Middle East with the three great countries, three great leaders. Qatar, you know, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and everybody said the same thing. All of the NATO countries, essentially, they said that we were a dead country. 1 year ago, we were a dead country. Now we're the hottest country in the world. Look at you people. We're the hottest country anywhere in the world. We're doing great. Yeah, do you have a...
Canada currently. What's the holdup with the negotiations with Canada?
Well, they have to pay a fair rate. That's all. It's very simple. They have been charging very, very high tariffs to our farmers, some over 200%. And they've been treating our farmers very badly. They've been treating our country very badly for years. And look, we like Canada. I love Canada. I have so many friends in Canada. But they've been very poorly led. They've been very, very poorly led. And all we want is fairness for our country.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, in office since March, didn't flinch. Standing before Parliament, he declared the move unjustified economic coercion and flatly refused to renegotiate the terms of the USMCA, the trade pact tying the two nations. Canada, he said, would not be bullied into compliance.
Again, imposed unjustified tariffs on our nation in violation of our existing trade agreements.
The economic whiplash was almost immediate. In Detroit, once the heartbeat of America's manufacturing prowess, production lines stalled. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on a city wired to global supply chains. The tipping point arrived on August 1st, 2025, the day the new tariffs officially took effect. By sunrise, Detroit was already reeling. Container trucks were seen turning around at the Windsor-Detroit border. Inside Ford's Rouge complex, machines sat idle while workers paced empty factory floors. Power flickered in parts of the industrial corridor, not due to grid failure, but due to factories halting high-demand operations to cut costs. Shipping docks stood deserted as imports ceased arriving. On the Canadian side, it was a different story. In Ontario and Alberta, production picked up pace. Steel mills in Hamilton ran on overtime. Western oil fields rerouted supply chains eastward, and Canadian rail traffic boomed as domestic industries braced to fill the vacuum left by U.S. disengagement. The collapse didn't come out of nowhere. In fact, the warning signs were visible months in advance. In March, the U.S. administration imposed a 25% levy on Canadian autos. In June, it floated a potential 50% hike on steel and aluminum. July's order was simply the execution of a strategy long in the making. Carney, once a central banker and global economic advisor, recognized the pattern immediately, a trade trap. In response, he activated Canada's Emergency Export Response Program. The government ramped up internal subsidies, supported industrial retention funds, and informed exporters to begin diverting shipments toward Europe and Asia. Canada would hold firm, even if it meant short-term pain. Meanwhile, in Detroit, the fallout cascaded. Without Canadian parts, Detroit's just-in-time manufacturing system buckled. Assembly lines at Ford, GM, and Stellantis froze. Engine blocks sat incomplete. Components lay stacked on pallets with no destination. The sound of welding torches and robotic arms faded into silence. By day 2, nearly 70% of auto parts deliveries had halted. Temporary layoffs surged. UAW union offices were flooded with calls. By the end of the first week, major manufacturers reported collective losses surpassing $2 billion. Raw material reserves vanished, and some companies declared emergency clauses to freeze contractual obligations. The official rationale from the Trump administration shocked many. The tariffs, they claimed, were a punitive response to Canada's inaction on fentanyl trafficking, a claim experts immediately disputed. According to U.S. Customs data, over 90% of fentanyl arrives via shipments from Asia, primarily China. Canada, in contrast, accounted for less than 1% of trafficked opioids entering the U.S. Analysts pointed to a broader pattern. Since Trump's re-election, trade protectionism had become central policy. The average U.S. applied tariff reached 27.4% by mid-2025, the highest since the 1930s Smoot-Hawley Act. Allies were being treated as adversaries, and the global trade system was beginning to fragment. Economic scholars warned this wasn't a tariff, it was a sledgehammer. Renegotiating supply chains isn't as simple as flipping a switch. U.S. dependence on Canadian raw materials runs deep, especially in steel, where 40% of input metals come from the north. Carney made it clear, Canada would not renegotiate a trade deal under duress. The economic damage was swift and severe. Detroit's core industries bore the brunt. GM reported a $1.1 billion operating loss for Q2, its worst quarter since the pandemic. Stellantis, operating under its European parent group, estimated €300 million in losses and halted operations in 2 major plants. Ford's CEO warned shareholders of an unsustainable materials bottleneck. In stark contrast, Canada's industry adapted quickly. Ontario's manufacturing output rose by 6% in 2 weeks. Alberta, previously struggling with surplus supply and lackluster refinery demand, found new buyers domestically. Premier Danielle Smith demanded a reciprocal 50% tariff on all U.S. steel and aluminum, rallying provincial leaders under a Buy Canadian campaign. The ripple effects were global. Asian stock markets dipped, responding to fears of U.S. overreach and global supply instability. The euro fell slightly against the loonie, as Canadian industrial assets appeared more stable. The U.S. dollar, meanwhile, wobbled amid a surge in import costs and trade uncertainty. U.S. lawmakers were divided. Some decried Trump's move as economic self-harm. Others, aligned with his nationalist agenda, praised the boldness. Yet trade law experts warned WTO mechanisms could not undo the tariffs unilaterally. Washington was cornered by its own policies. Behind the scenes, Canada was laying long-term groundwork. In early July, a $1 billion clean steel initiative launched, channeling federal funds into direct reduced iron DRI facilities and electric arc furnaces EAF, powered by hydroelectricity. Designed to make Canadian steel not just abundant, but the greenest in the G7. On Detroit's east side, longtime workers at a GM facility spoke to reporters about their fears. One union representative admitted force majeure wasn't clearly defined in their contracts. Many workers were unsure if they'd be paid. Some even reported having to tap emergency savings for rent and groceries just 3 days into the shutdown. Canada's carbon passport system, finalized in April, allowed its green steel to receive preferential tariffs in the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism. As a result, Canadian producers gained access to premium European buyers, just as the U.S. supply chain was breaking. As of August 1st, the tariffs remain fully in force. Carney's office has maintained radio silence on renegotiation. Instead, Canada is accelerating trade diversification, with bilateral deals forming across the Pacific and Atlantic. Detroit remains on hold. Some automakers have begun scouting domestic substitutes, while others consider shifting supply chains to Mexico or Asia. But retooling a decades-old industrial machine is slow and costly. U.S. production will likely remain frozen for months without urgent intervention. Experts warn Washington may double down, perhaps targeting digital trade or agricultural exports, but any such move risks isolating the U.S. further. Already, European and Chinese diplomats have voiced concern, and Mexico is reportedly exploring its own retaliatory framework. The question now is whether America's economic engine will adapt or fracture. What happened in Detroit was not a bang, it was a hush. The silence of machines no longer running. The pause of supply lines no longer flowing. This wasn't just a political gambit, it was a seismic shift in economic power. The bigger picture is clear. Canada is investing in future industries, green, diversified, and globally integrated. The US, meanwhile, is defending old strongholds. The question isn't who won this round, it's who's preparing for the next game. What do you think? Is this a misstep or a masterstroke? Has the steel tariff handed Canada a historic industrial edge? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more breakdowns like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.